Hello, my name is Kevin Smalsig, and I'm the Olefins Study Manager here at Solomon Associates. Today I'd like to talk to you about the Olefins study. Solomon's been conducting this study since the late 80s, and we have a tremendous database and historical knowledge from that study. At this time, the olefin industry is going through one of its normal down cycles, something we haven't witnessed in the industry since around 2009. Joining me today is Eric Kaufman, Vice President of our Chemicals Business Unit. Eric, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
So, given the industry downturn right now, why do you feel it's important to be benchmarking at this critical juncture?
Well, the first reason I would give is that the best are getting better. Performance is not static in the industry. Solomon, through the course of its benchmarking, measures performance in many different ways and across time. But one of the segments that we work with every study is identifying the best performing plants in the world. Something that our study participants know as high performing plants or HPPs. But these are the pace setters in industry against which all others are compared. And as we look at their performance, one of the things that we see over a longer time horizon is that performance level, that high performing plant level, is not static.
So Eric, tell me, you're mentioning it's not static. How's it changing?
Well, if we look at, let's say, the last 10 years, the reliability of the best performing plants in the world has improved by about 40% relative to the average plant. Their hydrocarbon losses have been reduced by about 48% relative to the average plant. Non-energy operating expenses are down 17%. So this level of performance has gotten consistently better over time. And so if you think about that as a competitive bar, it is getting higher or lower depending upon your perspective, but it's getting more difficult. And so as producers, establish, what their improvement targets are, they need to stay, in tune with the movement in the industry, and and those have been improving through thick and thin, upcycle and downcycle.
Wow, that's some big changes in a relatively short amount of time. In the industry, we've seen a lot of new plants that's come on recently, right? Some of these new capacity waves that's hit us. I think we've been through one recently. What kind of impacts do you see from these new plants? How are they impacting the competitive landscape?
Well, fortunately, Solomon has had the opportunity to see a lot of these new plants in the olefin study. In fact, our most recent olefin study, based on the 2021 operational year, had 13% of its study capacity based on new plants that have commissioned in the 4 years prior to that. And as we look at these new plants, they are very different from, let's say, the existing inventory of plants that operates today. On average, they're 81% higher capacity. And when you think about these new plants, they're anywhere from 1.5 million tons per year in higher ethylene capacity. And with the largest furnaces, the largest compressors, ever put into ethylene service, with some very up-to-date process technologies, these plants on paper are very, very competitive. One of the things that we have observed in looking at the performance of new plants is that while not all of them are operationally mature yet, there is a variation in performance as we look at them. Some are still kind of working through the startup issues. Others have achieved a very high degree of operational maturity, and of those new plants that we have seen performance that is just extraordinary, the best ever measured in the olefin studies. So, as we look at, that level of change that is being introduced by these new plants, the performance that they're capable of, the number of them, the fact that there are still some coming online, we expect this to transform the industry on a global basis. It's certainly one of the largest transformational factors. In fact, we would expect that the world's best plants that we just talked about, that are the pace setters, are ultimately going to be displaced by these new plants, given their level of performance once they mature.
So there's a lot of things changing in the world today.
And certainly, one of the trends that have been evident to industry for a number of years now is the growth in the global derivatives trade. And so whereas ethylene itself is not commonly traded in any volume, it's expensive to transport, the logistics capacity is limited, The ethylene derivatives, things like polyethylene, ethylene glycol, and, as well as other derivatives, are transported abundantly between regions. And so it really becomes a proxy for ethylene trade in a sense, and really a transmission mechanism for production cost differences between regions. And one of the trends that we've seen on a global basis is that the production cost differentials between regions have not been static. If you think of the world, you have the Middle East, that is a low-cost producing region, North America, which is just slightly higher cost than the Middle East, but overall, fairly comparable, at least on an aggregate basis. You look at Asia, the costs are on average about 70% higher than in North America or the Middle East. Europe is almost double the cost of North America or the Middle East, and these differentials have been growing sequentially since 2017. So I think as we look at the combination of the production cost differentials, the growing global trade, what we're seeing is that the barriers to, let's say, competitive forces or the insulating factors are dissipating away. There's really no hiding anymore in any part of the world. It's imperative that producers understand their cost structure, the factors that drive that cost structure, and not just against competitors in their own region. It's going to be looking at it on an intra-region basis.
So the dynamics of the global scale, the global economies of scale, the impact of being able to reach out another region in the world are going to change things. In the past, right, we've been through a few of these down cycles before. Mm-hmm. What have you seen that impact from Solomon's database? What has it told you about what to expect, or what can we learn from past down cycles?
The best way to understand how a current down cycle might unfold is by analyzing prior down cycles. And it's something that Solomon has spent a lot of time analyzing over the years. And I think there's one inescapable truth about down cycles, is whereas all producers effectively are facing the same business challenges, the same overall business environment, the financial outcomes will vary, and will vary significantly. There will be winners and losers.
Tell me about those winners and losers. What kind of a difference do we see in the down cycle?
Well, if we look at the bottom line measure of overall competitiveness, return on investment, the return on the top performing segment of the population will be about 5 times higher than the return from the bottom performing segment during the down cycle period. And you have to look at that more deeply to understand some of the causal factors. And as you peel back those layers of the onion, so to speak, what you find is that return on investment is very correlated with utilization. Now that part, is normally expected. Now the unexpected part of it in the down cycle is that the correlation between reliability and utilization is actually not that strong. There's actually a much higher correlation between utilization and lack of demand attributed losses, or let's say losses due to market effects, are much more significant than reliability related losses in the down cycle. And then when you peel back that onion even further, what you find is what really differentiates the lack of demand losses, which can be significantly higher for certain segments, as much as 10 times higher than segments that have lower lack of demand losses. The biggest contributing factor is production cost.
Well, you can see, right, certainly if I have a less volume, I don't have the same impact on my dilution of my fixed costs. So what have we seen, and what has Solomon experienced from the data in the past cycles on production cost?
Well, certainly, production cost is a very significant competitiveness indicator. There are many factors that contribute to production cost. I think having a detailed understanding of those is vital. When you look specifically at the down cycle in the things that drive both production cost and utilization, you will see a lot of differences there. There will be plants that have much higher utilization than others, even though average utilization is low in the industry. There will be plants that mitigate the effects of low utilization in their facility much better than others and experience fewer penalties. There will be plants that continue to make investments to improve reliability in the down cycle, to improve their opportunity to perform when the upcycle returns. So you see variation in outcomes, variation in practice. Is, there are winners and losers in down cycles, and I think it emphasizes how important it is to really remain in tune with where competition is going and how you rank up against that competition.
So if you expand upon that a little bit further and look at what you just said, right? Improvement becomes paramount, even more so in a down cycle. Is that something someone can do just one time, or is this a kind of a mind state or something? Tell me more about this improvement that needs to happen while in that down cycle.
Well, and that brings us to the subject of continuous improvement, and which is really the lifeblood of the olefins industry. It's really the lifeblood of any manufacturing industry. The competition is not static. Producers in plants need to be constantly evaluating how they can improve relative to their competition. And the nature of continuous improvement, it's a never-ending process. It requires focus, persistence, follow-through. A key aspect of that is measuring everything that you do, but measurement is not just internal, there is external measurement as well in terms of how are you performing relative to your competition. How is that changing over time? So continuous improvement is just vital to long-term success in the olefins industry. If you look at the down cycle in the distractions that can occur in a down cycle,
there are many,
and the fact that oftentimes when challenges are faced with cash flow, that decisions are made to deprioritize certain programs, to defund certain programs, and the net effect of that is that the continuous improvement programs are suspended in some cases, or rendered to a point where they're really not producing the intended effects. So one of the things to be concerned about is effectively discontinuing your continuous improvement programs in the down cycle, and that is something that we have actually measured in the olefin study in terms of the effects on producers who do that.
So tell me more about those effects.
Okay, so looking back at the most recent down cycle, the 2009 down cycle, unfortunately about 13% of the plants in the study decided to drop out as a result of the down cycle. And so when we look at that, we consider commitment to benchmarking on a continuous basis to be the closest proxy that we have to focus on continuous improvement. And I think the reason for that is that the olefin study is often the arbiter of the effectiveness of continuous improvement programs. And when you stop benchmarking, you are in effect interrupting your continuous improvement program. So if we look back at companies that have done that, and as I mentioned, 13% did in the 2009 down cycle, and we compare their performance when they return in the 2011 olefin study to their baseline from the 2007 olefin study, and we compare that relative to those who continuously benchmarked, continuously focused on their improvement programs, we see a number of striking differences.
Let's talk about some of the big differences, right? I know there's a litany of those that we out there, but what would say like the top 3 or 4 that you've seen based on our database?
Yeah, so if we look at in the area of energy performance, and when I talk about that, I'm referring to competitive energy performance. Those plants that dropped out, let's call them down cycle skippers, for lack of a better term, they achieved a 63%, or 63% of them had degraded competitive energy performance relative to those that continuously benchmarked. If we look at in the area of hydrocarbon losses, which is a very important area, 75% of those down cycle skipper plants had higher hydrocarbon losses. You mentioned reliability a few minutes ago. If we look at those down cycle skippers, 88% of them had degraded reliability and maintenance effectiveness, and 69% of them had higher total economic gap versus high performing plants. So all in all, the performance of those down cycle skippers was worse than those that remained focused on continuous improvement, who consistently benchmarked through upcycle and down cycle.
Well, that's sure a compelling case of why you want to continuously benchmark. I mean, you can see those are substantial, real data points that would make a difference in someone's business. I want to talk a little bit more about when you mentioned the area of reliability. Okay, we've seen that degradation, the percentage and the loss of that reliability happening in the upcycle or further on. What would you say to somebody who says, hey, I'm going to skip again and let's just talk specifically on reliability and what that will be and the impact to their business?
Okay, and looking at thousands of plant years of data in our database, there are several truisms about reliability that really rise to the surface. I think the first is that all plants are capable of good reliability. Whether regardless of feedstock type, regardless of age, regardless of geography, it's something that we have seen perennially over the history of the study. Another truism is that bad reliability does collateral damage to other performance areas. Bad reliability leads to worse energy performance, worse hydrocarbon loss performance, higher carbon emissions, higher maintenance costs. There are a litany of negative effects that come from bad reliability. Another truism is that the relationship between reliability and maintenance spend in olefins is one of the most complex relationships out there. And what I would say probably the final and most important truism is that the transformation from bad reliability to good reliability is really the longest cycle improvement trajectory that we have observed in olefin plants.
That trajectory or that journey, right, on the reliability area, what kind of cycle are we talking about? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What have we seen at Solomon?
What we've seen looking back at the data, and again, this is thousands of plant years of data, is that the average time to conduct what we call a full reliability and maintenance transformation from bad reliability to sustainably good reliability, and not just single year good reliability, but sustainably good over a period of time.
That's the key. That's
a 5-year journey on average. And when you consider some of the factors that are underlying that journey, it's no surprise that it's that long. It requires, in many cases, changes in business practices, work practices, organizational changes, capital spending in many cases, and finally culture changes. And these things are not things that occur very quickly, and they're things that require really a constancy of purpose in follow through over the long term to achieve. I think one of the misconceptions that is out there in industry is that reliability during the down cycle doesn't really matter. Market demand is lower. I don't need to be reliable. I will become reliable when I need to be reliable. And and the problem with that, we talked about a long cycle of improvement. 5-year improvement cycle, that if you want to be reliable when the upcycle comes, when the market demand is high, then you need to be reliable in the down cycle as well. And you need to be focusing on the transformation efforts, not losing sight of that. If you want to be reliable when the market is good, you've got to stay focused on that throughout the down cycle.
So it's not a one study's focus area?
It's not. And we have seen participants who've achieved tremendous success in reliability improvement by remaining focused on it, but we've also seen those fall off the trajectory, if you will, who lose focus on it. And reliability is one of those things that it's hard to achieve good reliability. It's even harder to sustain reliability, but it's very easy to lose good reliability.
So it's kind of like the old mindset, like an athlete: you either use it or you lose it.
Yeah.
Good analogy. We've been hitting on this, several of these areas, right, on the impact, right? I started to go there just previously in my last question on the difference in margins, right, during a down cycle. How does that get compressed? What do we see in our studies?
Well, what we normally see going from upcycle to down cycle is that the spread of margins from the best to the worst compresses significantly, around 40% in the down cycle. And that's something that we see in all regions. And so that with that compression, what you will see is that the difference in margins, let's say between a first quartile and a third quartile producer, might only be $30 a ton in the down cycle. So what does that mean? Well, that means there's opportunity in the down cycle. There's opportunity for real improvement in competitive position, that you could do relatively small things, make small improvements, the things that a continuous improvement program would result in. And those improvements could actually allow you to leapfrog competition and achieve significant improvements in competitive positions. So in the down cycle, it really is an opportunity. Small improvements can make a big financial difference.
So a little bit makes a big difference.
Certainly can.
Eric, we've talked a lot about this down cycle. We've talked about reliability. We've talked about the financial impact. We've talked about staying the course and how it's critical to continuously measure. If I'm an olefins producer right now and I'm having to deal with this down cycle, right? I've got a lot of things hitting on me. There's all kinds of priorities, from people issues, right? Just the financial impact of what it is, my market. One of the areas that also seems to be coming up a lot and getting such a huge focus these days is sustainability, right? And over time, right, these issues just seem to be growing and growing. How has Solomon been responding in the olefin study from a sustainability perspective?
Yeah, and we have the opportunity to talk to producers all around the world and talk to leading producers on a regular basis, and we have certainly seen the acceleration of sustainability demands on the industry across all dimensions. I mean, it's decarbonization, it's water footprint, it's renewable energy, it's circular economy. There are a lot of different drivers and a lot of different pressures coming from many places. So in response to that, Solomon, in its most recent olefin study, the 2021 olefin study, actually launched a sustainability benchmarking module. That was a very broad-based module where we were looking at carbon emissions, we were looking at other air emissions, we were looking at cost of carbon, water use, recycling, and a whole variety of different indicators and insightful metrics around competitive sustainability performance.
That's a mouthful. It's a lot of data. Despite all that we brought to the study in 21, what are we doing for 2023?
Well,
can you share any of that?
I can share some of that, but before I do that, I want to just maybe kind of just go over a little bit what came out in the 2021 study, or some of the observations that we made. 35% of the industry, or 35% of our study capacity, now has regulations regarding carbon costs, whether it's cap and trade mechanisms or carbon tax programs. 35% of capacity is now regulated, and from our conversations with industry, that number is only growing. I think in the area of greenhouse gas emissions, we determined that the lowest carbon footprint olefin plants have a 67% lower footprint than the highest carbon emissions.
That's huge.
And we were able, through the study this year, to identify 10 different factors that really differentiate carbon performance in crackers. So it's something, some really great insights came out of that was really of great benefit to producers.
It obviously makes a big difference. So I kind of jumped the gun on you. What are we doing different in 2023?
Yeah, so we look at the launch of sustainability benchmarking in the 21 study is really just the foundation. It's really just a start. This is going to be a journey as well. We have a number of significant improvements planned for the 2023 study that we're currently implementing. And we are going to be having a whole new set of metrics around circular feedstocks and as well as recycled product, attributed recycled product. We're going to be launching a new carbon analytics as well as energy analytics functionality. So that and many more changes will be coming to the sustainability module for the 2023 olefin study.
So it's clear there's some really key new things, really exciting things coming in for 2023 that should help people in that sustainability journey.
It's a rapidly evolving area right now, and I think that given the demands from society, from governments, and all of the different entities that are placing pressure on the industry, there really isn't an option these days for companies not to have well-articulated sustainability goals and be making regular progress towards those goals. Just because we're in a down cycle, sustainability doesn't go to sleep in the down cycle. Producers need to stay focused on their goals. They need to be reevaluating their goals as new information becomes available, and staying in close contact with really the latest data from industry in regards to that is going to be very important to both refining those targets as well as continuing to deliver on the programs.
So, we continue to talk about this down cycle in the industry. And, as producers constantly tell us, right, they've got all this, list of priorities of things that's hitting on them. And, it really impacts people, particularly when you get under some financial strain that can happen in a down cycle. Where do you see safety playing out that and its impact to people in this type of environment? And how has Solomon been trying to help people, our clients, understand that impact to their business?
Well, safety is obviously a paramount performance in all parts of the business cycle. I mean, it's fundamental to the license to operate for any producer. And it can certainly be argued that the down cycle is an area of potentially higher vulnerability to safety-related incidents. I mean, there are a lot of distractions in the down cycle. There are a lot of morale issues in the down cycle that can be concerning. And producers have to remain very, very vigilant to not let their safety performance slip during the down cycle.
So I know we implemented some safety metrics in the 2021 study. What kind of insights did you see coming out of that study cycle that you can share with us today?
Well, let me give you a little background on that first. In that, yes, safety benchmarking was launched for Solomon with the 2021 Olefins study, but we did not do that with the intent of just benchmarking safety. There are certainly other entities that do that. Our objective was really to be able to establish linkages between safety performance and other aspects of the olefin plant performance spectrum. So looking at the relationship between safety and reliability, safety and maintenance practices, safety and maintenance cost, safety and personnel staffing levels, and the whole olefins plant performance spectrum, so that we could really start developing some further insight into the causal factors that differentiate safety performance.
So you mentioned the tie between safety and reliability, and safety and financial performance. Those are just a couple of them. What did the data tell us in those areas?
Well, the data in those areas, I think, validated what industry suspected all along. That yes, a safer plant is a more reliable plant by about 40%, actually. And and through that, we also established a pretty firm connection between safety performance and return on investment. But the insights didn't end there. There were certainly what I would call unexpected insights that came out of the study.
So what kind of surprises?
So, one of the things that we established is a very strong relationship between preventative maintenance and process safety incidents. And we also found a very interesting relationship between process safety performance and type of cracker by feed class that really goes beyond just the complexity differences between the cracker. And then there was another area that was very unintuitive to us in looking at the relationship between staffing levels and safety performance, that there is definitely a sweet spot with respect to staffing levels in safety performance, that you don't want to be too high or too low. And
so a Goldilocks moment.
There is a Goldilocks moment when it comes to staffing as far as safety performance. So I would say coming out of this study, we really did establish some further insights into the factors that drive safety performance, and we certainly encourage producers, particularly in this down cycle, to learn from them and apply them. Particularly in this period where perhaps we're a little bit more vulnerable to safety-related incidents.
Thanks for that, Eric. It's been some good discussion. With all that underpinning, right, that backdrop of what we've been discussing today, how would you see the impact of all those forces coming together and impacting a producer's profitability as we go forward? And how's that tied to the data that we provide in the olefin study to our clients?
Well, certainly the olefins business is a long-term business. We've discussed it's a cyclical business. That business cycle can easily be 8 to 10 years. And the assets that comprise that industry are long-lived assets. So certainly the measurement that producers apply when it comes to overall financial performance is often cycle average measures, a 10-year, let's say, average return basis. And when we look at that, related to the down cycle, what that does illustrate is that down cycle performance does matter. Sometimes there is the misconception that it doesn't really matter how I perform in the down cycle, because in the up cycle, I'm going to make so much money that it's going to offset the down cycle performance. And so why worry about down cycle performance? But the data says something different.
So you're trying to tell me then that how I do in the down cycle matters ultimately what I'm going to do when I get to the up cycle?
Yeah, in fact, we recently did an analysis where, again, looking back at the 2009 down cycle, and we took those plants that had, just within the down cycle period, the highest return, and that was a cross-functional group or a cross-regional group. And then we compared that to a group of plants that had the lowest down cycle return. So we could call these two different groups the down cycle leaders and the down cycle laggards. They respectively had either the highest return in the down cycle or the lowest return in the down cycle. And then we tracked them over the next 10 years. And how did they do from the standpoint of cycle average returns?
What did the data say?
Well, the data said that the down cycle leaders achieved twice the 10-year return on investment of the down cycle laggards. So if there's any doubt as to whether down cycle performance matters, it matters a lot. The decisions that you make in the down cycle are consequential. The improvements that you make or don't make or continue to make in the down cycle are consequential. Focusing on your performance, understanding where you are from a competitive standpoint in the down cycle is just as important as in other parts of the cycle.
So Eric, right, let me summarize what we just talked about today, right, as far as regards to benchmarking in the Olefins study. Summary number one, right, the best keep getting better. No one's standing still, things aren't static. Newly commissioned plants are making a huge impact and they're changing the game. And it's not just an impact that you see in your own region of the world. Trade is truly global. The derivative markets are global. And the olefins market and feedstocks are starting to impact things globally. So you not only have to pay attention to what's going on near you and around you, you need to look out globally and see what's happening all over the world. We talked about how the business environment, right, is going to generate some winners and losers. We talked about having to be very purposeful and continuously improving your operations, or you're going to get left behind. We looked about reliability, and it isn't something that you just, do one time. It isn't like a light switch, so to speak, right? You can't just turn it on and off. You have to be purposeful with it, and you have to be intentional, and it's even most critical during the down cycle. We talked about little impacts, small improvements make a big difference, right? You mentioned that the margins in a down cycle can be as little as $30 a ton. So a dollar or two here or there really impacts the company's financial performance in this type of environment. We looked at sustainability and how it's impacting everything that people do. It's competing for time, it's competing for talent, it's competing for focus in the organization. You did a great job of telling us how Solomon's been responding to that and helping clients understand that area of sustainability, this of growing importance, and some of the new things that we're going to be doing in our study in 2023, right? We talked about how safety is such a key focal point. It has to be, and even becomes more important in the down cycle. You summarized for us some of the impacts, how safety, not only just the numbers, which can be gotten in other areas, but how it is translated across and how it impacts reliability, how it impacts costs, how it impacts personnel staffing and the implications of that. And lastly, right, the importance of how you do in a down cycle and your performance portends whether or not you're really going to have a higher upcycle or a lower upcycle, which ultimately drives the whole business cycle performance. Is there any last thing that you would add that would be kind of a reason for why someone should definitely benchmark in a down cycle?
Well, certainly as you summarized, the bottom line reason that the better performers in the down cycle are the better performers over the whole cycle. The down cycle performance is consequential, that the decisions that are made, the programs that are implemented, the continuous improvement that stays continuous in the down cycle is really, really important. But I think, beyond all that, if you look at the Olefins study participation as an investment, and you look at one of the things you receive as an Olefins study participant is an assessment of your economic gaps at a very detailed level, and say that, okay, let's say a producer closes 10% of that gap, so just a small amount, and we compare that to the fees for participation, that the payout on that is equivalent to 250 times the fees for participating in the study. So just the investment in the Olefins study itself is a substantial opportunity for producers, not just in the down cycle, but across all phases of the cycle.
So the payout, just in that alone also is truly compelling and enormous. Eric, I can say you've given us a compelling case for why you need a benchmark in a down cycle. It's obvious, the data says it, the rationale behind it underpinning all the impacts makes a huge difference. And the bottom line is, if I can do well in a down cycle and understand where I'm at, I can outperform in the up cycle. I appreciate you coming by and talking with me today. As always, it's a pleasure talking to you about the Olefins study.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.